Les gens, les boxeurs comme style, c'est très agressif. Ils ont toujours ces t-shirts un peu à la Tyson, là, des shorts du four, un petit
And when I say you must obey, just like the both of you touch my head.
Et là, Maïva, ce sont les deux.
Ouais, le crochet. Magnifique shot.
Ah, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Et ouais, le crochet au foie, il a touché.
Là, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Pendant Bigouan, encore
Maïva
un
va
rouge.
au corps.
Allez, c'est met dur là, qui a arrêté.
Oui, forcément, elle remet un genou au sol.
Et elle regarde son point. Ça va dans tous les sens, la part des deux boxeuses. Et tout ça par du bon point. Elle a touché encore un nouveau point. Elle a du mal, Viviane.
Et
Elle a du mal à récupérer.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Heather Hardy had this to say. She says, I don't belong at 126. My fat ass nearly died making weight every damn camp. Weight cut week, 30 hours, no food, no water, all day in plastics, dead in steam room, spitting in a cup on my way to the scale. 135 for 2021. Hashtag manifesting who wants to fight me. To which Steffi Bull, the trainer of Terry Harper, the WBC super featherweight champion, replied, no one can afford your wages. Essentially what Steffi Bull was hinting at was, Heather Hardy's gripe over what kind of money she was offered during the shutdown.
I was offered a fight with Terry in February, and there was a little bit of Twitter talk. I thought it was super exciting, and I was over $20,000 for it. And it's like I said before, I mean, $20,000 at this point in my career is almost like a break even.
It was Steffi Bull's contention that, $25,000, that's decent money for that kind of fight, all things considered, given what's going on out there. But as far as Heather Hardy was concerned, that kind of money, it's just not worth it. It's not worth getting out of bed for. It's not worth the trouble it takes to prepare yourself in camp. So, what Heather Hardy's planning is to campaign at 135 pounds, the lightweight division, which is a weight that she feels more comfortable making. I want to say that the lightweight division does not yield all these same opportunities, all the varying options that the super featherweight division yields, 130 pounds as opposed to 135. Heather's planning on going to 135 in the coming year, but, at 135, you just don't have the same variety of opponents because Katie Taylor, the undisputed champion at this weight, has cleaned out that division, cleaned out that weight class. Currently, she is in possession of all the world titles at that weight. And that being said, one can make the inference that if Heather Hardy is considering campaigning as a lightweight from here on out, it's a Katie Taylor fight she's targeting. It's a Katie Taylor fight she's after. And we all know there's no other fight at or around 135 that pays like a Katie Taylor fight.
That's right.
That being said, if it is Katie Taylor that Heather Hardy has in her crosshairs, she better take a number, because she's just one of many girls that wants that fight, that wants that opportunity. And I don't know where Heather Hardy ranks in Katie Taylor's priority list, her to-do list for the coming year.
I don't think Heather's on Katie's radar.
I just don't. I think Heather Hardy is an ideal opponent for perhaps a super featherweight like a Natasha Jonas.
Good fight.
And Alicia Baumgartner, a Tiara Brown.
Those are interesting options.
And perhaps are a lot more feasible than, Katie Taylor, because Katie Taylor's got any number of girls knocking on her door looking for an opportunity. And I don't think Heather Hardy ranks very high among them in terms of what Katie is likely to do in her very next outing, in her very next fight. The thing is that, we can see that Heather's concerned with the prices, with the dollar signs of it all. I mean, it is prize fighting, so there is going to be some emphasis on the prizes. And you don't get fighting a Natasha Jonas, which you could get fighting Katie Taylor. I mean, I think that's the motivation here.
But you have to actually land the fight to get paid for it.
So what are the odds that Heather Hardy lands herself a Katie Taylor payday, a Katie Taylor opportunity? Not likely from where I'm sitting. She's more likely to receive offers to fight the likes of a Natasha Jonas than a Katie Taylor and any number of other super featherweights out there, I think she's likely to get offers to fight fighters in the 130-pound division as opposed to landing a big payday with Katie at 135. I just don't see see that happening. I don't think that's in the cards.
She can go up there if she wants to.
She can have a couple keep busy fights with a couple guys in a 135-pound division. She can do that if she so chooses. She's a grown woman. It's her decision. But as far as, a Taylor fight, yeah, I don't see that happening. There are those aforementioned factors to consider, but there are also Hava's physical dimensions. Hava wasn't big as far as featherweights, you understand. And she's really not a big guy as far as super featherweights go either, in terms of, her frame.
She's very petite.
That being said, there are some girls right there at super featherweight that would tower over Hava. Girls like Mikaela Maya, girls like Eva Protnika, girls like Hyun-Mi Choi, girls with much bigger frames, taller drinks of water than little old Hava. So just imagine what trials and tribulations would await her in the lightweight division at 135. Now, I'll tell you something. Hava Hardy's about as tough as they come. She really is. Real grit from this fighter, you understand. But Hava wasn't really that big of a puncher in the featherweight division. And I think she'd lose some of what power she does have if she went up to 130, let alone 135. I mean, listen, Hava's tough as nails. Nobody can take that away from her. But maybe 135 pounds isn't as ideal a weight for Hava as she thinks it is. That, yeah, maybe it's easier for you to make, but what about the girls that are there? Big, strong girls in the lightweight division.
Gotta factor that into it, too.
At least now we have some idea what Hava Hardy plans on doing in the coming year, and, we'll just see what develops. We'll just see how it all goes for her. And welterweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Timothy Bradley, former two-division champion Timothy Bradley, now an analyst for ESPN, was quoted as saying, "Why would you go up to face Canelo, but you won't face Crawford, who's in the same weight as you? I think Errol Spence is at a point now, he just wants to get the money. Then he wants to leave the game. He has no intention of fighting Terence Crawford." And, I actually had the privilege of talking to Tim here on the channel about just this subject. And Tim is echoing the same sentiments that I've expressed, that, look,
listen,
I think Errol is more content selling his undefeated record to Canelo Alvarez as opposed to gambling it against Terence Crawford.
My honest take on the fight is he didn't want to fight. They don't want to risk it on Crawford, because if you lose to Crawford, you don't make as much money as if you lose to Canelo. If you lose to Canelo, yeah, you lose, but you get more money.
Yep,
And-
makes all the sense in the world. Makes all the sense in the world. My bad, man. My dog is in the way. Makes all the sense in the world, man. And then if you lose to Crawford, then all the belts, guess where they go?
Exactly.
They go over the top rank, and then you have the welterweights over there. What are they fighting over? Nothing. Doesn't make any business sense at all.
At this point, it's just a case of basic arithmetic. Errol Spence Jr. knows, and his team knows, there's a chance that they lose that Terence Crawford fight. And for running those risks with Terence Crawford for X amount of dollars, you run those same risks with a Canelo Alvarez for more money, for more dollars. So from where they're sitting, it doesn't make financial sense to take a chance on Terence Crawford. And that's why they don't prioritize that fight. That's why they're more comfortable calling out the name of Canelo Alvarez, who isn't on their side of the street. Bear in mind, as, sides of the street are so fucking important to those guys, but they don't seem to matter when Canelo Alvarez is involved. Better still, the Spence people are just more comfortable with him losing to Canelo Alvarez at 160 than they are to losing to Terence Crawford at 147, rather running those risks. That's the look of it. The plot twist, as it were, is that Canelo Alvarez doesn't have an Errol Spence Jr. fight in his immediate future, in his immediate plans, because we all know what Canelo Alvarez is trying to do from here on out. He's trying to unify the super middleweight division. He's trying to become its undisputed champion. And unless Errol Spence Jr. in the next 2 to 3 fights snags himself a super middleweight title at 168 pounds, that Canelo Alvarez fight, that's just not going to happen.
Sorry.
Out of that Callum Smith fight, Canelo Alvarez seemed a little bit more open to the idea of fighting Errol Spence Jr., but very quickly post-fight, he made it clear that he has no intention of returning to the middleweight division in the near future. In the near future, what he plans to do is return to defend his title against his mandatory challenger, Avni Yildirim, which we talked about in my previous video, and then see about unifying titles with Billy Joe Saunders in May. Wheels for that plan are in motion. That being said, don't don't look for a Canelo Alvarez versus Errol Spence Jr. fight anytime in the near future.
I mean, I was never looking for that fight to come off with you.
The truth is that Errol Spence Jr. is going to have to reconcile what he is going to do for his immediate future and in it, because what he's not going to be doing is fighting Canelo Alvarez, no matter how many times he wants to use that guy's name to get articles written about him. That fight is not happening anytime soon, if at all. So what is Errol Spence Jr. going to do, since he places no priority, no emphasis on the Terence Crawford fight? The Canelo Alvarez fight is very elusive, and so is the Manny Pacquiao fight. That's yet another guy whose name he likes to throw around as a potential opponent option, even though that decision isn't up to Errol. It's up to Manny. Oh, I understand that no progress has been made in that Terence Crawford situation. That's a situation that is pretty much at a standstill, at a stalemate. But the alternatives that Errol Spence Jr. is leaning on, crutches he's got, those fights just aren't likely to come off. So there is a question as to what is he going to do next. He doesn't seem very receptive to a Keith Thurman fight.
Nope.
You've already fought Sean. You've already fought Danny.
So what are you going to do? Try to sell us Yordanis Ugas on pay-per-view?
I wouldn't put it past him. The truth is that as far as what the future holds for Errol Spence Jr., I'd sooner believe he gives Keith Thurman a shot before he gives Crawford one. I'd sooner believe he gives Yordanis Ugas a shot.
Him too.
Because I'm convinced that Errol Spence Jr. will fight most anyone and everyone but Terence Crawford. Anyone but that guy. I think that both Errol Spence Jr. and those who handle his career, because rest assured, no matter what he says, he's a handled fighter. He takes orders, the way all those PBC guys take orders.
They do.
I think that from where they're sitting, the Crawford fight is more trouble than it's worth. And for running the risk of losing to Terence Crawford for some amount of money, you can run that same risk against someone else for more money. At this point, all Errol Spence Jr. is doing is auctioning off his undefeated record, the way that Mikey Garcia auctioned his undefeated record off to Errol Spence Jr. Errol's following in Mikey's footsteps. He's basically trying to do the same thing. As Errol Spence Jr. so eloquently put it, he's here for a good time, but not a long one. People over there at the PBC would have you believe that Errol Spence Jr. is targeting a Canelo Alvarez fight from some desire to add to his legacy, when, you know what, if you really wanted to add something to your legacy, you'd fight Terence Crawford.
You would.
What happened to strap season? What happened to trying to become the welterweight division's undisputed champion?
This guy can't keep the same energy.
This is apparent to me as it is apparent to Tim Bradley.
And many others.
At this point in the juncture, all Errol Spence Jr. is doing is planning his exit strategy, and he's willing to auction off his undefeated record to the highest bidder, whether that bidder is Manny Pacquiao or Canelo Alvarez. One way or another, Errol ain't fighting for legacy, and that much is obvious, because if he were, he'd put more priority on that Crawford fight. And finally, the WBC president, Mauricio Suleiman, had this to say. He says, Haney has two mandatories, Garcia versus Campbell winner and Javier Fortuna. The lightweight division, the mandatory challenger for Devin Haney is the winner of Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell. Mauricio Suleiman, president of the WBC, confirmed to Boxing Scene and other reporters during a virtual roundtable on Tuesday. Because he won a vacant championship, he also has a second mandatory, which is Javier Fortuna. Fortuna was going to fight former three-division titleist Jorge Linares in August, but Linares tested positive for COVID, so Fortuna remains. And the two mandatories for Haney are the winner of Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell, and Javier Fortuna is the second mandatory. This weight category goes back 3 years with extreme complications, admits Suleiman. Former four-division and WBC lightweight titleist Mikey Garcia moved up in weight, after which the WBC orders a series of fights, which several fell through. Haney won the interim title, then the world title, and then he got injured. Then Fortuna was going to fight Campbell in a vacant title fight canceled due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's a long process. Haney has the mandatory in the winner of Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell. And since Fortuna couldn't do the fight, he is the secondary mandatory. And I told you guys before that when it comes to the winner of Garcia versus Campbell, don't look for the winner of that fight to take on Devin Haney unless the winner of that fight is Luke Campbell. If Luke wins the fight, he will likely try to challenge Devin for the full version of the lightweight title. But if the winner is Ryan, don't look for Ryan to have that Haney fight. Not right away, not within that time frame. Ryan seems to have his heart set on cornering Gervonta Davis and having a fight with him. I don't know how much success he's going to have with that, but better still, Ryan has other plans. I'm not saying I'm okay with it. I'm just telling you what it is. I'm just giving it to you straight. That's the way the cookie is likely to crumble if Ryan Garcia beats Luke Campbell. Comes to the secondary mandatory to Devin Haney's WBC lightweight title. He's a little bit more likely to take on Devin than the aforementioned
Ryan Garcia.
when it comes to Devin Haney's secondary mandatory challenger. Javier Fortuna, who is promoted by Samson Lukowicz. Samson Lukowicz, who is in bed with people over there at the PBC.
All right.
Let me tell you something, the PBC ain't got the hold over the lightweight division that they have over the welterweight division and the super welterweight division.
They don't.
They ain't got the stable at 135 that they've got in other weight classes. Guy like Javier Fortuna, he ain't got but so many options. That being said,
Maybe he does fight though.
Javier is actually a little bit more likely to take on Devin Haney than Ryan Garcia, provided that Ryan is victorious. I view a Javier Fortuna fight as being more feasible than a Ryan Garcia fight. The scalp of a Javier Fortuna is a respectable enough scalp that I wouldn't mind seeing that fight between Haney and Javier Fortuna, who's a tough guy, rough and tumble.
Yeah.
Aggressive, likes to throw a lot of punches. I could go for a fight like that. Moreover, Haney needs that opportunity just as much as Javier does, because in spite of Devin being a reigning world champion, most people don't look at it that way. He's still getting short-sighted comments and quips about being an email champion, a paper champion. He needs to legitimize his reign in front of the eyes of his critics. He needs to get the paying public on his side, and one way he can do that is to have meaningful fights with meaningful fighters. Javier Fortuna could be one of those guys. Masayoshi Nakatani, who just upset the plans for Felix Verdejo in spectacular fashion, I might add. Masayoshi Nakatani, that's yet another option that I think they should explore. The former three-division champion Jorge Linares is yet another avenue of opportunity for Team Haney. There are opponents out there that I think Team Haney should explore, because the reality of it is they might want a Ryan Garcia fight, and they might want a Teofimo Lopez fight, but it takes two to tango.
It does.
And neither of those two guys seem all that receptive to fighting Devin Haney, for whatever reason.
Does it even really matter why?
It still results in the exact same situation. You want certain fights with certain fighters that you aren't about to get right now. So what are you going to do? Moreover, what are you willing to do?
You're going to have to step it up at some point.
It's just going to have to. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it, okay? Devin Haney is a young fighter, unbeaten, world champion, in what are still the earlier stages of his career, and he still needs to make his bones as a professional. He still could
A few fights.
do with some experience, and I think he could gain that experience against either Javier Fortuna, Masayoshi Nakatani, or Jorge Linares, who would easily be the most solid fighters he's faced so far. I don't think the door should be closed for any of those fights with those fighters. I want to see him fight Ryan. I want to see him fight Teofimo just as much as the next guy, but I know those fights aren't about to happen, not yet, so what's he going to do?
In the in-between time.